My husband said, "I'm taking the dog, you get the kid." His mom laughed. "At least the dog's trained." On court day, my son asked the judge, "Can I read what Dad texted me last night?" The judge raised an eyebrow. His lawyer turned pale. The courtroom fell silent. I never thought I'd be standing in a courtroom, fighting over custody with a man I once promised forever to. But here I was. The cracks in our marriage weren't sudden. They were slow and quiet like water eroding stone until one day, everything just broke. It started a year ago, when Tom began working late. Then came the secretive texts, the hidden phone calls, and the cold silences at dinner. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to admit it, not to myself, not to our 10-year-old son, Lucas. Not even to the golden retriever, Max, who was the only one still excited when I walked through the door. When Tom finally came clean about the affair, he didn't even have the decency to be ashamed. "We've been unhappy for a long time," he said flatly, like I hadn't been trying, like I hadn't been holding our family together with bare hands. We agreed on the divorce, but nothing else. He moved into an apartment across town. We tried to keep things civil for Lucas's sake, but even that became impossible when the custody talks began. Tom wanted Max, our dog, and made it very clear I could keep our son. "I'm taking the dog," he said one night after we finalized some paperwork. "You get the kid." I stared at him, stunned. My heart cracked a little more in that moment. His mother, who had always resented me for reasons I never quite understood, let out a shrill laugh from the kitchen. "At least the dog's trained," she said with a smirk. Like my son was some unruly burden, some unmanageable task, I was stuck with while her precious Tom ran off into the sunset with a well-behaved golden retriever and his new girlfriend. I didn't say anything then, but I decided that day we'd fight this in court. Not because I wanted revenge, not even for pride, but because Lucas deserved more. More than to be treated like a chore, like a check on a list that Tom didn't want to deal with. Lucas stayed with me mostly. Tom had visitation on alternate weekends, but even those were inconsistent. Sometimes he'd cancel last minute or drop Lucas off early. Other times, Lucas came back quiet, too quiet for a 10-year-old who used to tell me everything. One night, a week before the final court date, Lucas and I were sitting on the couch. He was unusually thoughtful, his eyes flicking from the TV to his phone. Then he looked at me. "Mom," he said slowly, "if I wanted to talk to the judge, could I?" I was surprised. "About what, honey?" He hesitated. "Can I read what Dad texted me last night?" I tried not to react, but my stomach flipped. "What did he say?" Lucas pulled out his phone. "I want to tell the judge myself." I stared at him. He was just a kid, my sweet boy, who still asked for goodnight hugs and loved grilled cheese sandwiches. But in that moment, he looked older, heavier, like something inside him had shifted. "Okay," I said softly. "We'll talk to the lawyer. If you really want to, I'll support you." The morning of the hearing, I was tense. Our lawyer had prepared everything, but nothing about this process felt predictable anymore. Tom sat across the courtroom, smug in his suit. His mother was right behind him, in her usual pearls and judgment. His lawyer was making polite small talk, but I could tell she was nervous. Maybe she knew something was coming. And then Lucas stood up. He looked at the judge, calm and clear. "Your Honor, can I read what Dad texted me last night?" The judge raised an eyebrow. A whisper rippled across the room. Tom's lawyer froze. His face went white. The courtroom fell silent. There was a stillness in the courtroom that felt unnatural, like everyone forgot to breathe at the same time. The judge leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady but curious. "You want to read something your father sent you?" she asked Lucas gently. Lucas nodded. He looked small standing there, but his voice was steady. "Yes, ma'am." Tom shifted in his seat. "This isn't appropriate," he started, but his lawyer reached over, whispering something urgently. She looked rattled. The judge raised a hand to quiet him. "Let the boy speak." Lucas held up his phone, thumbs trembling just slightly as he scrolled. Then, in front of the judge, both attorneys, and the silent room, he read aloud. "I don't want to take care of you, Lucas. You're too much like your mom, always needing something. Max doesn't talk back. You do. Be good in court, so I can get the dog and we can all just move on." A few people gasped. The judge's expression didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened. Lucas lowered the phone. "I love Max," he said quietly, "but I know Dad doesn't want me. He makes me feel like a problem." I was frozen in my seat. Every muscle in my body ached with the effort not to cry. Not here. Not in front of Lucas. The judge turned to Tom, who suddenly found great interest in the table in front of him. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, voice clipped, "is this message accurate?" Tom stammered. It was taken out of context. He was being difficult, and I was tired. Are you denying sending this message? Silence. His lawyer placed her head in her hands for a moment, then turned to the judge. Your Honor, may I confer with my client in private? No, the judge replied curtly. We're in the middle of a custody hearing. You may speak, or we move on. Tom shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean it like that. I was just frustrated. You said, be good in court, so I can get the dog. That implies your priority was not your son, but your dog. The judge looked back at Lucas. Thank you for your honesty, young man. That was brave. Lucas nodded once and sat back beside me. I squeezed his hand. The rest of the hearing blurred in my mind. I remember phrases like emotional well-being, parental preference, and demonstrated interest. But mostly I remember Tom's silence, and the fact that his mother, for once, had nothing to say. When the judge gave her ruling, it wasn't a surprise, but it was still overwhelming. Sole physical and legal custody will be awarded to the mother, she said. Visitation rights will be reconsidered after 6 months, pending a psychological evaluation and demonstration of parental commitment by Mr. Reynolds. The gavel hit the desk. It was over. Outside the courtroom, Tom tried to speak to Lucas, some half-hearted attempt to smooth things over. Lucas didn't look at him. Can I go home with Mom now? He asked me. I nodded. We walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. For the first time in months, I felt like I could really breathe. We didn't say much in the car. I think Lucas was still processing everything. But as we pulled into the driveway, Max barked and ran to the gate, tail wagging wildly. Lucas opened the door and grinned. Hey, buddy! The dog jumped up, licking his face. I watched them, my son and that dog, and thought about how Tom had said, at least the dog's trained. But it turned out, my son had more wisdom, strength, and courage than any adult in that courtroom. And he'd just proven it. The weeks after the hearing were quiet, not the tense, uncomfortable quiet that had filled our home before Tom left, but a peaceful, healing kind of silence. Lucas returned to school, and I returned to work. We found a rhythm, just the two of us. Well, 3 if you count Max, who became Lucas's shadow. There were still some hard moments. Lucas didn't talk much about his dad, and I didn't push. I knew he'd speak when he was ready. One evening, about a month after the hearing, Lucas was sprawled on the living room floor, doing homework with Max snoring beside him. He looked up and asked, Do you think Dad's mad at me? I set down the laundry basket I was holding and sat beside him. No, I said carefully. I think your dad is probably embarrassed, maybe confused, but you didn't do anything wrong, Lucas. He picked at the edge of his notebook. I didn't want to get him in trouble. I know you didn't, I said. You told the truth. That's never wrong. He nodded, but he didn't smile. That weekend, a letter arrived from Tom. It wasn't handwritten, it was typed, folded neatly into a white envelope. The language was polite, formal, distant. He asked to restart supervised visitation in a few months. He apologized for any confusion or hurt caused by the message he sent. He hoped that, in time, Lucas might be willing to rebuild their relationship. I showed it to Lucas. He read it silently, then handed it back to me. He didn't say sorry for what he said, he muttered. He said sorry if it hurt. There was no bitterness in his voice, just clarity. You don't have to decide anything right now, I told him. When you're ready, we'll talk about it. He nodded again. Then he stood up and walked to the backyard. Max followed. I watched through the kitchen window as my son threw a ball across the yard, laughing as the dog chased it. Just a boy and his dog, and no weight on his shoulders for the first time in a long while. Over the next few months, things kept getting better. Lucas started playing soccer again. He made a new friend in class. At bedtime, he asked for stories again, instead of just lying there with headphones in. Sometimes I wondered if Tom realized what he'd lost, not just custody, but connection, respect, the right to hear about the big things first, to be included in the little ones. He didn't fight the judge's decision. Maybe his lawyer told him it was a lost cause. Maybe he knew. Eventually, he was granted a few supervised visits. Lucas agreed to one, at a neutral location. He came home afterwards with a tired look. He tried to be fun, he said. It felt fake. That's okay, I said. You don't have to fix anything. That's not your job. He just shrugged. I know. And that was that. As time passed, Tom faded into the background of our lives. Letters came less frequently. Visits stopped altogether after a while. Lucas stopped asking about him. One night, about a year later, I found a crumpled sheet of paper in Lucas's desk. It was something he'd written but never showed me. It said, My dad chose a dog over me. But I'm glad, because now I know Mom chose me every time. I sat on his bed that night, holding his hand while he slept, tears silently slipping down my cheeks. Not from sadness, but from pride. From relief. This wasn't the life I imagined when I married Tom. But it was a life for real, messy, beautiful one with a boy who had more strength in his little finger than most men ever gain in a lifetime. And with a dog who, trained or not, was part of the family that stayed. I appreciate you watching till the end. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more content.